Okay, everybody, good morning. Good Thursday, April 29th. Welcome to the Root Cause Solution radio show that we're calling it. And so welcome, everybody. We've been getting a lot of questions this past week, so I'm happy to address some of these today. I'm going to put up a few things here. What I want to start with, though, I think is an important subject. I want to get this started first regarding seasonal allergies, right? We're right smack in the middle of it. You wake up, the news is reporting the pollen count on the cell phone, you get pollen alerts, right? So again, whether it's grass, whether it's trees, flowers, these all emanate as they bloom, they're emanating pollen. Pollen is considered an antigen, meaning it's foreign to the body, right? And so what happens when we don't feel well, right? When we get the sneezing, the itchiness, the scratchy throat, the itchy eyes, the cough, our bodies feel inflamed and tired. It aggravates our sleep. We've all experienced it to some degree, more than others, certainly. But let's just start with some basic fundamentals of what's happening, right? Is there's a part of your immune system, which is known as the Th2 side of your immune system, which predominantly inhabits the mucous membrane. So again, your sinuses, your bronchial tracts, your lungs, your GI tract is lined with a mucus barrier, mucus. And you have the predominance of the immune system called Th2 division that resides there. So everything that we breathe in from the environment, such as pollen, even the foods that we eat, the proteins from the foods, what we drink, is all being checked by this mucus barrier. It's your frontline defense to the outside world. And we have a lot of specialized cells there. So the grouping is called the Th2 or T helper 2 division. When the T helper 2 division is activated, it itself instigates what we call an inflammatory response. So inflammation is driven by this Th2 system. This is why asthma and allergies are going to reside in what we call a Th2 dominant environment. So we want to work on how do we kind of calm down that Th2 environment and increase the opposite, which is called the T helper 1 or Th1 system. Now, in this Th2 system, there are several divisions, but one type of immune cells that predominates there are known as mast cells, M-A-S-T, mast cells. And what mast cells do is that when they break down, they release a chemical known as histamine, right? So many of you are familiar with histamine, right? So when we're scratching our eyes and sneezing and coughing and feeling irritable, right, it is from the release of the histamine. This is why, what do? We go down to the local pharmacy, to the Walgreens, to the CVS's and the Rite Aids and whatever, and people will buy an antihistamine, right? And often it can help, right? But it doesn't last, right? They got to take it again and take it again and take it again. I'm not saying not to take it if it gives you relief, but the point is that you're taking what is called an antihistamine, right? I joke, you're not taking anti-pollen. You're taking antihistamine, right? And what it really is, excuse me, see, I have it myself now a little bit. You have an exaggerated mast cell response. It's turned on too aggressively, and so it's releasing too much histamine. So it's the actual histamine that's making you sneeze and cough and feel irritable, not the pollen itself. It's the histamine reaction. So we want to know a little bit more about histamine. Pardon me, see, I'm having it myself this morning. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of personal story about myself to shed light on this. Ever since I was a little kid, I suffered terribly with seasonal allergies. Seasonal allergies. Which I'm having right now, as a matter of fact. And but I had to walk around. I would get rushed to the emergency room periodically. Had to walk around with an inhaler, and that's just the way that I had to get through it. As I got a little bit older, it got a little bit better. But I still, as you can see, I still suffer with the seasonal allergies, especially the springtime allergies. Now, one of the things that we do in the office certainly is with managing the immune system, is we want to make sure that we can tone down the Th2 division and put more support and more emphasis into the Th1 division. Now, from a nutraceutical perspective, we have things in the office. So certainly things like quercetin and bromelain and echinacea, glutathione, vitamin C, all of these things basically kind of increase and push the body more into a Th1 division and down regulates the Th2 division. So there are many companies out there that produce or manufacture supplements that can try to tame down or calm down the Th2 to lower the histamine response, lower the inflammatory response. But is that enough? Is that sufficient? What I really want to get to, I want to shed some light on some interesting things that most people don't know and most doctors don't know. Okay, which is what is the role that other foods actually play here? So if anybody's been listening to me for any length of time, by now you probably have heard me say that in my career as I've been moving along and I continue to learn in this world of functional medicine, but if there's one common denominator that I see over and over and over again, regarding whatever the diagnosis is or the symptomatic complaints are, whether they be neurological, hormonally, pain-driven, whatever it is, the common denominator is the immune system. And what does the immune system do when it's activated? It increases an inflammatory response. So again, the inflammation is at the root of all chronic degenerative types of conditions, right? And that's why when you go to the food store, right, we see magazines all over the place. I have one in front of me right now. It's called Clean Eating, and it's called anti-inflammation. Reset your health with the anti-inflammatory approach. Right. And we also get people started on what we call an anti-inflammatory diet. So the key here is obviously is we want to reduce inflammation. So remember, reducing inflammation really is reducing a Th2 response. It's trying to reduce the mast cell activations. So when we're having that seasonal allergy, we're getting phlegmy and cough and stuff, right? We're tethering too much on the Th2 division, more pro-inflammatory. So is the Benadryl enough? Is the supplements enough? And the answer is no. And here's where I want to go with this. For some time, we've known about things known as cross-reactivity. So when you talk about the immune system, you cannot talk about the immune system and not talk about a subject which is called cross-reactivity or cross-reaction. So what does that actually mean in layman's terminologies? Right? Simply put, if the immune system is reacting to one thing, it can possibly cross-react with something else. So the immune system, when the immune system is reacting to anything in our bodies, right, what it reacts to are proteins, right? So what is your body made up of? It's made up of proteins, right? So the immune system can react to your own body's proteins, and that's what an autoimmune condition is, right? So if the immune system is reacting to the proteins that make up your thyroid gland, you get diagnosed with autoimmune thyroid known as Hashimoto's. If your immune system is reacting to the proteins of your digestive tract, you would get diagnosed with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. So the diagnosis of an autoimmunity is just descriptive of where the immune system is creating the attack. Now, what about cross-reactivity? So again, if you talk about foods, are foods proteins? Yes, foods are proteins. Even carbohydrates have a protein structure to it. So the immune system can react to food proteins. So the question is, does the molecular structure of the food protein look similar to the protein structure of your own self-tissue? Or does it even look similar to the protein structures of plants and other things like pollen? So if we take an example of gluten, so many people know they're gluten reactive or suspect of gluten reactive or have tried gluten-free diets. Fair enough, right? So what is the connection between gluten, for example, and the thyroid? Well, if your immune system sees the protein structure of gluten as something foreign, right? Meaning it sees it as what is called an antigen. An antigen refers to anything that's foreign to the body, foods, pollens, anything, chemicals. So if the immune system sees the gluten structure protein as something foreign, and it creates an immune reaction against that. It triggers an inflammatory response. Step one. If the protein structure of gluten looks similar enough to the protein sequencing of your thyroid proteins, then that's called an epitope. Then your immune system really can't tell the difference between the gluten and your thyroid gland. So if you are eating gluten and your immune system is reacting and creating inflammation and attack against the gluten protein, it turns around and it cross-reacts with the thyroid. That's known as cross-reactivity. Okay, what's that got to do with allergies? Everything. Okay, so when I was a little kid, I learned really early on that I have a reaction. This is without testing. I knew I had a reaction to apples, peaches, pears, plums, and cherries. Cherries especially. If I ate those foods, my mouth would just get incredibly itchy. My throat would start to close. I would get hivey and feel almost feverish. Felt terrible. No matter how many times I tried to get over it, I had the same reaction. I just learned to avoid it, right? But what do these foods do? They fall into a category known as rosacea, right? And what they do when the immune system reacts to that, the immune system releases a high amount of histamine. So when I ate those foods, my immune system dumped a whole bunch of histamine to my body, and it was the histamine that was making me feel really, really bad, right? So I learned, okay, I want to avoid those foods. But if I ate other foods that released histamine, what would I get? My ears would get really, really red. My skin would get flushed, like rosacea. I was getting a histamine reaction. Now, in many people, myself included, is there's an enzyme in our digestive tract known as DAO, or diamine oxidase. And that enzyme helps our digestive system to break down foods that release histamine. So there's a lot of foods that release histamine, like tomatoes, for example. In my particular case, genetically, is that enzyme doesn't work so well. So if I'm eating a lot of foods that have high amounts of histamine in them, and they're releasing histamine in my digestive tract, the lack of that enzyme can't degrade and break down that histamine. So now the food that I'm eating is creating a histamine reaction, and I'm feeling lousy again, and mucousy, and all that kind of stuff. Let's turn, I hope you're following this. Let's turn now to the pollens and the allergens, which is really a fascinating thing because I ran some tests on myself, allergy tests some time back. And one of the things that stood out that I have a high reaction to, an allergy response to, is birch trees. Birch trees, which are predominant in the Northeast. And ironically, I happen to have 5 birch trees on my property. Not a good thing, right? So here it is, I have an allergy reaction. So during the season, the birches are blooming, they're releasing birch pollen. I have a allergy to that. So what do I want to do? Okay, I'm going to avoid, I'm going to stay indoors, I'm going to wash, I'm going to shower and clean, all that kind of stuff. But here's what's interesting is that we know now that there is cross-reactivity. There's the cross-reactivity with food proteins. Birch pollen cross-reacts with certain food proteins. And here's a list of some food proteins. Hazelnuts, apples, there's apples. So a long time ago, I learned that I had a reaction to apples, right? Apples, listen to this, celery, carrots, and soy. Okay, what does that mean in English? That means that even if I'm avoiding the birches or I'm away from the birch trees off my property, there is cross reaction between celery, carrots, hazelnuts, apples, and soy. So if I am eating, unbeknownst, a lot of people are doing celery juice drinks, carrot juice drinks. So if I'm eating a lot of celery and carrots and hazelnuts and apples, right, my immune system is reacting to that equally as it is the birches. So if I'm eating those foods, I am heightening more aggressively my immune system's reaction when it's exposed to the birch pollen. In fact, what research is telling us, okay, is that when people have food allergies, most food allergies that people develop is really as a cross reaction to pollen allergies. What is this? Again, so I'm trying to make sense of this, right? Knowing that I have a reaction to birch pollen, it would behoove me to make sure that these foods, celeries and carrots, also in this category, really, they're showing signs of tomatoes and spinach also, some of the, and eggplants, some of the foods that fall into the nightshade categories. So I need to get those foods out of my diet, knowing that I have a birch tree reaction. What's confusing, right? So you go to the store, I'm looking at a magazine, the anti-inflammation reset your health diet. And what are they showing in here? They're showing all the vegetables and fruits, right? Tomatoes and spinach and avocados and all these things. Unbeknownst that when people eat those foods, they could be feeling worse. Right? And so you're like, your head is spinning saying, well, what am I supposed to do? Oh, one thing you could do is you could run the tests. You could really labs that we work with, they will run tests. They will run inhalants. They will run these food things so we can determine where there are potential cross reactions so that you know that, oh, even though I like doing my celery juice drink, maybe I shouldn't be doing celery juice drinks, especially during the spring pollen season. I should avoid carrots. I should avoid tomatoes and spinach during those things. I would say collectively, I mean, the first thing I would take out, honestly, during this season would be fruit. That's right, you heard me, fruit. Fruits, especially, okay? Everything from grapes to citrusy fruits to melons are very cross-reactive with the majority of people. With the environmental pollens that have been released, that's inclusive of birch trees, oak trees, grasses, ragweeds. Okay, these common foods that we eat, these fruits and these vegetables are very cross-reactive, which means even though you're doing the best you can to avoid the grass and all that stuff and wash and stay indoors, if you're eating these foods, you're not going to feel any better. In fact, you might even feel worse. So I hope that sheds some light on what is called cross-reactivity. I can spend 2 hours talking about cross-reactivity, right? Um, so if we take, for example, gluten and thyroid again, this is where the immune system gets really crazy, but it really is all about the cross reactions. So we know that gluten also is very similar in molecular structure to dairy. So if we get the gluten out, but we're not getting the dairy out, right? The dairy can still be a cross reaction with the thyroid gland, right? It's noted that about 60% of adults with food allergy reactions occur because they have reactions with foods and pollen together. It's really the pollen that's the problem. So I'm just looking at a note here I wrote down. There's a chemical in the birch tree pollen. It's known as profilin or profilin. It is the primary allergen found in birches, in grass, and other pollens. And it's also, this compound is also found in many plant foods. Now, doesn't that sound like a conundrum there, right? Because what is always advocated is plants, 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 plants. Fruits and veggies are anti-inflammatory and stay away from your carnivore diet and your meats, right? But hey, as individual people, right, we know that we are living in an environment and, you know, we're not getting in politics and global climate changes, but we know that pollen counts are definitely increasing season after season after season with higher releases from all these things. And so it may pay us due diligence to take some consideration into the foods that we eat, even the so-called healthy foods, with the primary focus being on the vegetables and the fruits as cross-reactive triggers. And so we can do some elimination diets here by taking out gross categories like fruits, or you can run tests to find out more specifically which fruits and vegetables, at least seasonally, you might be cross-reacting with. For example, if we know you have a cross-reaction with birch, as I do, I would definitely encourage you to take out those cross-reactive foods that I just listed, right? All tree nuts would come out. Okay, again, avocados would come out. Yes, avocados, spinach, tomatoes, celery, carrots, those things should come out. Um, so let's go see. What else are we going to talk about here today?
Well, I mean,
So,
just on that theme,
sure.
somebody had asked, for most of my life, I generally did not have much issues with allergies and only had mild symptoms in the fall.
Right.
But the past 4 to 5 years, as she's turning 50s or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
her allergies have gotten worse and they've lasted from spring to fall. So she started taking Zyrtec.
Yeah, so somebody saying that she's turning 50, her allergies are getting worse. problems that she didn't have in the past. Now she's taking Zyrtec. So exactly what I started with. You're taking an antihistamine. It's going to give you a resolve because it is lowering the histamine response, but it's not driving at the underlying root cause. And so why do we have more maybe potential allergy response or more reactive? And today, let's say we're turning 50 than we did in our 20s. Well, let's say a lot of reasons for that. But again, if we know that the immune system, which is the reactive, which is really creating that reaction, is intimately related to your digestive system, right? 80% of your immune system is in your gut. So the changes in your gut microbiome from everything from age and sleep and stress and diets and medications all change the dynamics of microbiome, which is going to have an impact on it. Simultaneously, it also has to do with hormones because your hormones and the changes in hormones are directly linked to your immune system. So hormone changes influences your reactivity or sensitivity to your immune system. And as I just alerted to a second ago, which is with environmental changes, is year after year after year, is there is a higher increase in pollens than there were the year before. So that's a lot of it too. But the key thing here is that you may be developing more and more food reactions to the common foods that you think are healthy, that are, it's really referred to as a biotoxic accumulation. The more that you keep accumulating the immune chemical response to these foods I just listed year after year after year, or even like we tend to eat certain foods seasonally, which is great, but we tend to may start turn to more fruits in the springtime and more lighter vegetables like celery and carrots and apples and peaches because they're coming out. Or we eat a lot more apples right in the fall, but a lot of times we're eating more of those foods. But if you have these seasonal allergies, there's a good likelihood that you're getting cross reaction that's bioaccumulating to a toxic burden that's tipping the scale for your immune system to become more heightened. Just remember that what's happening as your immune system becomes reactive to the foods and it's cross-reacting with the pollen and the pollen's cross-reacting with the foods in both scenarios is you're releasing your mast cells are more active and they're releasing more and more histamine. The Zyrtex, the Benadryl can temporarily, for hours at most, dampen some of that histamine response to give you some relief. But if the foods that we're eating is stoking the fire, right, and still causing more mast cells to release histamine, it's like a hamster in a wheel, right? So even if you need to take the Zyrtec temporarily, it would be much more beneficial to find out what the triggering foods are, remove those, along with hygienes of washing hands and showering and using the recirculation things.
What are some at-home tips?
At home tips, definitely in the seasonal allergies. I might have birch trees outside the window, is which I don't do enough of, is keeping the windows closed, even when it's really nice outside, right? Air purification systems imperative, especially in your bedroom, especially in the living areas where you are. It is really important. Really your bed, your sheets, and your pillows, because if you're outside, you don't realize you're getting just pollen follicles that are on you, on your body, in your hair. Maybe not so much in my case, unfortunately, but we carry the pollens with us. We don't really wash our face and heads. We lay down in the bed at night and the pollen trickles onto the sheets and onto literally onto your pillow sheets, and we inhale it throughout the night, day in, day out. So I would wash the sheets more frequently. I would wash face and hands before you go to bed. So, washing, showering a little bit more frequently is important. Air filtration system is important. But really, the number one thing is find out, get the foods out. Get the foods out. That's really triggering the innate system or the immune system response.
So if I'm having an issue in my ear,
Mm-hmm.
one side more than other,
Mm-hmm.
how would I know if that's an allergy response versus some other kind of infection?
So someone is asking if you have an ear pressure, ear pain, and
Yeah, ear pressure, ear pain.
ear pressure or pain in one side of the head versus the other side. How do I know if it's an infection?
An allergy is an infection. Like how
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no way of knowing directly. I mean, there's a little bit of investigation. Um, Obviously, the one thing I always tell people is that if it's an infection, typically if you are going to press on the ear itself, the outside of the ear, tug on the ear itself, it's going to hurt. Okay, because the actual eardrum or inside the eardrum is infected and there's so much inflammation. As soon as you tug on it, you're going to be feeling pain. So if you're not tugging on it and there's really no pain, the infection is probably not higher on the priority list. Can it be allergies? Yeah, these seasonal allergies, certainly, that's high up there, right? Um, again, we inhale a lot of pollen through the nasal cavities and through our oral cavities. And so, and as I'm alluding to, can the foods bioaccumulate and be part of the scenario here? Yeah. Again, I know it's kind of like we're all kind of brainwashed into trying to avoid. We think of meat specifically as inflammatory and bad. We associate it with heart disease. For today's subject, I can't go into that. If you want me to do that on another uh, radio segment, maybe next week or something, I'll be happy to get more into that with you. But meat, specifically healthy grass-fed, grass-finished meats and beef, is far from inflammatory and far from problematic. And it's probably usually missing in most of our diets effectively. We're trying to eat healthy, and we're going to the health food stores and the Whole Foods and things, and we're stocking up on these things. And I'm not trying to say that fruits and vegetables are bad, not in any sense of the word, but but they but they can be bad individually, and they can be bad at certain times of the season more than others. And you can certainly run tests to find that out. So we're happy to do that. Anybody who's interested. But certainly you can take out the huge categories of this. You can just Google cross-reactivities with birch trees and fruits, and you'll see lists of things that come up. What was the other question, Cynthia?
Well, I mean, you're getting questions like if I'm taking stuff to support my immune system, am I doing enough? Like how?
If somebody's saying if they're taking stuff to support their immune system, are they doing enough? That's exactly what I've been alluding to for the last 20 minutes or so. Like, what are you taking for your immune system? What does that mean? People get a cold, they take vitamin C. Is that enough? Maybe, maybe not, right? It's really more of the delicate balance of your immune system. Remember, let me make this again simple for anybody who's kind of starting to follow along. The immune system is very complex, but if we make it in as simple human language as possible, there are two main divisions. One is known as the Th1 side of the immune system. One is known as the Th2 side of the immune system. I'm just saying something here. Does that mean anything on the Zoom call? The Th1 part of the immune system is the part that fights things that are foreign, that wants to fight a bacteria or a virus. So if we're saying, people saying, I'm taking something to support my immune system, I'm under the impression that they're taking things to support the Th1 side. And those are things like vitamin C and zinc and glutathione and echinacea and so forth, right? But the other side is called the Th2 side. And the Th2 side is really the part that drives inflammation. By the way, when we think about antibody production, we're producing antibodies. Right. So again, just using COVID as an example, if we get infected with COVID, it's the Th2 part of the immune system that that manufactures the antibodies. There are different kinds. And the ones we want are the IgGs, give us long-term immunity. If we go for a vaccination for COVID, what we're trying to do is we're trying to activate and stimulate the Th2 the Th2 division to produce the antibodies. So it's going to upregulate that, right? So if we're trying to do immune modulation, right, in the seasonal allergy stuff, we may be trying to use some botanicals to down-regulate the Th2 response. And those could be things like turmeric and resveratrol. Your vitamin D levels also help to regulate that response. Vitamin D, by the way, is really important, whether it's viruses and COVID or whether it's allergies, because the missing part here are called immune regulating cells. And the immune regulating cells regulate your Th1, your Th2. So the regulating cells are important in trying to calm down the Th2 response. And that's influenced by vitamin D. So woefully, I see so many people with their vitamin D levels that are just tragically too low. And if that's the case, then they're not going to get adequate regulating immune response, and they're going to have a more difficult time calming down that Th2 response. So to kind of wrap this whole thing up, right, is you really want to have a multi-prong approach, especially with the seasonal allergies. You want to do due diligence and just removing exposure and washing, like I said, using air purifications, maybe cleaning your sheets more often, certainly use the recirculating button in your car. Those are, good hygiene practices. If you're taking nutritional supports, you probably want to err on reducing the Th2, and so things like turmeric, resveratrol, and quercetin, all those anti-inflammatories are good and upregulating your Th1 with vitamin C and glutathione and making sure your vitamin Ds are adequate. But the thing I'm really mostly alluding to today is really having an appreciation for the role that foods that we're eating, how they cross-react with pollen. And as I once said to repeat, is that what's being shown in the research that more than half the populations of people, 60 to 80% of people that have food reactions, especially food allergies, it's really being created initially by pollen reactions. The pollen reactivity is then causing the immune to cross-react with the foods. But once that happens, even if I'm eating the foods, I'm reacting. But if I'm eating those foods during this season, when the birches and the grasses and the ragweeds are blooming, right, even the perfect hygiene is not going to work so good, and even the supplements are not going to work so good if I keep eating those foods. That's turning on that cross reaction. So that's sort of like the triage of that approach. The food eliminations, and I would start mostly with the fruits and veggies and stay more with leafy greens, right? And the botanicals, okay? I know you're cutting me off here, but is there any questions I can answer? Because
No, we're out of time. That was great.
okay, everyone, I hope that was helpful. Any questions on that? I know that was kind of heavy. Any questions? Post it to the Facebook group. Please post it there, and we will answer more of your specific questions regarding the cross-reactivity. If anyone is really interested in running some of these types of cross-reactive tests to get some more insight, let us know and we can arrange that for you. Okay? Very good. And we will see you next Thursday. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you in May.